Hi, my name is Brent Labasan. I'm a big Andrew Yang fan, and in this video, I'm going to give a summary and review of episode 1 of the Andrew Yang podcast, which is titled Yang Speaks. It's hosted by Andrew Yang, and Zach, what's his last name? Grauman is also a host, and yeah, I'll be talking about the most important points that I got from it. And if you don't have an hour to watch the podcast, maybe this quick summary will do you good. At 2450, they talk about the question, where do we go from here in this COVID-19 climate? Yang talks about him usually being a positive guy, usually. But right now, he thinks that attitude right now is bullshit. This shit is terrible, and trying to look for the silver lining in this historic shitstorm is stupid. So, and I really appreciate, end quote, that's one thing that endears me to Yang. He's a jovial guy. He knows how to keep the positivity. That gets him, more fans. But he also knows when to cut the bullshit. He knows when to use a more serious attitude. Yang knows how to read the room. And him to say, drop the not act, not facade, but get down to business and say, like, this is serious. That's one thing I really respect about Yang. I think the most important thing in the podcast, episode 1 of Yang Speaks, is him saying what he keeps learning over and over is that people don't subscribe to ideas. People subscribe to people. End quote. If you want and it's true, if you want an idea to take off, you have to wrap it up in a person. Yang talks about associating the person with the idea, or else the idea won't take flight. I agree 100%. It's just easier for the society changing ideas to take flight if it's closely tied up, if it's wrapped up in a person. People are looking for leaders to lead them. It's hard becoming a leader yourself. It's hard enough. Finally, the last note I took is at 1 hour, 6 minutes, 15 seconds. Yang closes off saying, Yang Gang is building up the playbook to better our future. The people on the Yang Speaks podcast will help build up this playbook. So yeah, you should definitely stay tuned. And so, yeah, that's my review / summary of episode 1 of the Yang Speaks podcast. If you're already familiar with Yang, then the summary I gave, that's pretty much all you need to know. There's nothing like groundbreaking in there that was, revealed. It's just the first episode of the Yang Speaks podcast. If you are not a Yang, if you're if you just heard a small bit about Yang and you want to learn more about him, just go to his website. Just Google, probably the website is still yang2020.com, or just Google Andrew Yang and you'll be able to see all his policies. And finally, I'll probably make another video about this, but I think that deserves its mention right now. The Yang Speaks podcast is sponsored by the Jordan Harbinger Show, which is a podcast itself. And I love this podcast. It's a typical, people call in and they give advice, and those are called like Feedback Fridays. And then they also have guests come in like other days and they talk about their interesting lives. And the show is big on self-improvement. It's it's a typical podcast, self-improvement, talk show podcast format. But the one thing that makes Jordan Harbinger stand out is I really love, especially in his Feedback Fridays, he gives concrete, tangible, step-by-step advice about what people can do to better their lives. People call in, they have problems, and Jordan Harbinger shines when the people who call in, they do their due diligence, they say what steps they have taken to try to improve their situation, but they fail and they're not getting the results they want, and then Jordan Harbinger is able to come in and give the next steps. And that would be really helpful to people who have tried and they're feeling discouraged because their initial steps have failed. Jordan Harbinger really does a great job of coming in and providing additional help, providing additional support. Jordan Harbinger is a real deal. Jordan Harbinger his podcast is definitely something you should take a look at, especially the Feedback Fridays. And I just wanted to mention that because just the very fact that Jordan Harbinger sponsors the podcast, that is amazing. Right now, I wanted to do a talk about like what the Yang Speaks podcast could probably be doing better, because we should always be striving for better. But right now, I think it would be best to make it its own separate episode. So, yeah, that is my episode 1 review and summary of the Yang Speaks podcast. I hope you find this useful.